No. Grace, sweetheart, don't fall. Oh, God. Someone help me. Keisha Morgan's voice tore through the living room, high and cracking, the sound of a woman caught between terror and awe. Tiny feet slapped against the polished floor, quick, frantic, alive, and the air hummed with a panic. Thomas Prescott didn't yet understand. He stood frozen in the doorway. Breath punched out of him as the impossible unfolded not 10 feet away. 3 wheelchairs sat abandoned behind them, their straps hanging loose, their frames hollow like discarded skeletons. And the girls, his daughters, the daughters who were never supposed to stand, were upright, stumbling, swaying, laughing, reaching. Please, Keisha whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks as she held out shaking hands. Just one more step, come to me, baby. Ava lurched forward. Lila tottered after her, curls bouncing wildly. And Grace, delicate, fragile Grace, pitched sideways, and Keisha gasped, catching her just before she hit the ground. Thomas's knees buckled. His pulse roared. His brain refused to form a single logical thought. What is happening? He whispered. The room spun. His chest constricted. Nothing made sense. Keisha turned her head, eyes wide with shock, and something else, something fierce, triumphant, terrifying. Mr. Prescott, she choked out. You need to see this. Thomas Prescott didn't reach for his phone. He didn't need to. His eyes were already watching the live miracle unfolding in front of him. But half an hour earlier, before he ran down the hallway, before he burst into the living room, he had seen it first on the cameras. He'd seen it like a man watching the universe glitch, and it had broken him. Before we go on, if your heart twisted even a little watching that moment, if seeing those 3 fragile girls standing on legs, the world said would never hold them, made you whisper, please, don't let them fall, then don't slip away now. Subscribe, because these girls have been invisible their whole lives, and staying with their story, step by trembling step, is the smallest way to show they matter. Now, let's go back to where this all began. Thomas Prescott didn't check the security cameras out of curiosity anymore. He checked them because the world had taught him brutally that if something could go wrong, it already had, and it was probably happening under his roof. 11 caregivers in 2 years had proven it. Some careless, some distracted, some dishonest. One greedy enough to try selling medical photos of his daughters for profit. So when the motion alert buzzed on his phone that afternoon, Thomas didn't brace for delight. He braced for disappointment. He tapped the notification, and the live feed sharpened slowly into view. At first he noticed nothing, just the living room furniture, the soft sunlight, the decorative frames on the wall. Then he saw them. 3 identical wheelchairs lined against the far wall. Empty. His heart missed a beat. No nurse, no therapist, no adult hands anywhere near the girls. Thomas leaned in, thumb shaking against the edge of the phone. Where are they? Where are my daughters? The camera adjusted, and their center frame were Ava, Lila, and Grace, standing, teetering, reaching, daring gravity to knock them down. Keisha knelt in front of them, her arms stretched wide, her voice trembling with hope. Come on, my sweet girls. That's it, Ava. Baby. Yes, like that. Come to Miss Keisha. Thomas couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. Everything he'd been told, every prognosis, every medical certainty collapsed beneath him. Ava took one shaky step. Lila followed, smiling so big it almost split her cheeks. And Grace, delicate, quiet, Grace lifted her foot and took 3 steps in a row. Steps. Real steps. Keisha let out a broken sob, catching them as they reached her, cradling all 3 babies against her chest. Thomas's phone slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a crack. He staggered into the wall, sliding down it as the weight of the moment crushed him. A sound tore from his throat, raw and unfamiliar. He didn't know if it was a sob, a prayer, or the sound a man makes when the impossible becomes real. He stared at the image on the phone screen, chest heaving. He had prepared himself for many things over the last 2 years: deterioration, complications, emergencies. For a future measured in wheelchairs, therapy schedules, and quiet birthdays. But not this. Never this. He wiped his trembling hands across his face, but the tears kept coming, falling silently at first, then harder, then uncontrollably. This moment, this single, impossible moment, felt like someone had cracked him open with their bare hands. He saw his daughters alive in ways he had never allowed himself to imagine. He saw a woman, Keisha Morgan, fighting for them with a faith he'd long abandoned. He saw himself small, hollow, unprepared, facing the truth that he'd spent 2 years surviving instead of living. He forced his shaking legs to move, pushed himself upright, and stumbled toward the living room. Now he stood in the doorway watching the scene he'd only glimpsed on a screen. The girls clung to Keisha, giggling breathlessly, chests rising and falling with exertion. Their curly puffs bounced as they wiggled in her arms. Keisha looked up at him, face streaked with tears, cheeks flushed. "They walked," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. "They walked, Mr. Prescott." Thomas swallowed, unable to trust his own voice. Ava saw him first. Her tiny lips curved in recognition. She reached out a hand, small, chubby fingers stretching toward her father. He felt something break again inside him. Quieter this time. More intimate. More painful. He dropped to his knees, palms on the floor, head bowed as he tried to gather himself. The room was spinning. His heart was pounding like it didn't know how to beat anymore. His chest burned with every gasp. Keisha shifted the girls in her lap. "It's okay," she murmured, rubbing Lila's back. "Daddy's just feeling it, feeling it." He was drowning in it. Thomas lifted his head slowly. The girls stared at him with wide, curious eyes. Alive, awake, present. He didn't remember standing. He didn't remember moving. He only knew that suddenly he was there, reaching out, touching Ava's cheek, brushing Grace's curls back, tracing the soft roundness of Lila's arm. They leaned into him instinctively. He bit back a sob. No medical chart had prepared him for this. No prognosis had accounted for love getting in the way. No specialist had predicted a woman like Keisha. He looked up at her, voice barely a whisper. "How?" She shook her head, still crying. "I didn't do this alone." He blinked. "They've been trying, Mr. Prescott," she said softly. "All this time, they've been trying to move, to reach, to grow. They just needed someone to believe they could." Thomas closed his eyes, because she wasn't only talking about the girls. She was talking about him, too. That moment, the raw, impossible miracle of it, felt like the beginning of something brand new. But the truth was far heavier. This moment had roots. Deep ones. Roots planted in grief and watered in fear. Roots he had buried the day the world broke. And to understand what happened here, to understand how 3 paralyzed little girls found their legs, you would have to go back. Back to the hospital. Back to Olivia. Back to the beginning of all his unraveling. Back to the day everything fell apart. Washington, D.C. was strangely quiet the morning everything began to fall apart. Not the political kind of quiet, no. Georgetown had its own silence. A rich man's silence. A historic silence, woven into the bones of century-old brick homes, stained glass windows, and the slow hum of the Potomac drifting under the Key Bridge. Inside one of those grand federal-style homes, a restored 1,892nd estate on Prospect Street, Thomas Prescott woke to sunlight spilling across the foot of the bed, catching the edges of the white bassinet tucked into the corner. Except the bassinet was empty. Because the girls weren't born yet. Because Olivia was still pregnant. Because life, at that moment, was still intact. Before the chaos, there had been hope. So much hope it sometimes scared him. Olivia Prescott was the kind of woman Georgetown society whispered about with admiration. A philanthropist. A lawyer who'd turned down 3 federal offers because she wanted to work at a children's advocacy nonprofit. A woman who filled rooms with warmth, the way chandeliers filled them with light. She'd wanted children more than anything, but the universe had not made it easy. For 4 long years, Thomas and Olivia visited specialists across D.C., from Georgetown University Hospital to Sibley Memorial to Johns Hopkins up in Baltimore. Terms like low ovarian reserve, implantation failure, and unexplained infertility became routine vocabulary, sprinkled between dinner conversations and late-night tears. Olivia refused to break. She decorated nurseries they eventually had to take down. She bought baby shoes, just in case. She would pause in front of strollers rolling down M Street, one hand resting on her heart as hope and longing pushed against her ribs. Thomas pretended he was strong for her, but every negative test result hollowed him a little more. Then, after their 3rd IVF attempt collapsed into disappointment. Attempt 4 changed everything. A phone call from Dr. Sandoval at GW Hospital. "Your numbers look excellent this time, Olivia. You're pregnant." Olivia's voice cracked. She whispered something Thomas would remember forever. "Don't let me wake up. If this is a dream, please don't let me wake up." 6 weeks later in the ultrasound room, the tech frowned. Not a worried frown, an astonished one. "Mrs. Prescott. Mr. Prescott. You're not having one baby." She turned the screen toward them, eyes already misting. "You're having 3 triplets, 3 miracles. 3 heartbeats, echoing in the dimly lit room like a promise." Olivia sobbed into Thomas's shoulder. For a moment, the world was perfect. Triplet pregnancies are never easy. Not even for the wealthy. Not even for the optimistic. Every week came with new instructions from maternal fetal specialists at GW Hospital. More iron. Less work. No travel. More rest. Let your husband carry everything. She listened, kind of. Olivia wasn't built for stillness. Even as her belly grew, she insisted on cooking, gardening, walking along the C&O Canal in the evenings. But the shadows began early. Mild preeclampsia, high blood pressure, blurred vision, swelling. "Just normal risks," she kept saying. "Triplets are dramatic. I'm fine." Thomas wasn't fine. He watched her too closely. He checked her breathing at night. He started attending every appointment, every scan, every blood draw. The specialists warned them repeatedly. "This pregnancy is high risk. Delivery could be complicated." Olivia only smiled, patting her belly. "These 3 little girls are fighters. I can feel it." It happened on a cold March morning. The Potomac was swollen from overnight rain. Fog drifted low between the historic row houses of Georgetown. The air felt heavy, too heavy, Thomas would later say. Olivia woke before dawn, wincing as she shifted upright in bed. "You okay?" Thomas asked. "Just back pain," she whispered. Except it wasn't. An hour later, she was pale. Another hour, and she was in the back of an ambulance. Her blood pressure had spiked dangerously. Contractions were coming faster than they should. GW Hospital turned into chaos, nurses rushing Olivia into labor and delivery, doctors calling for additional support, monitors lighting up with warnings Thomas couldn't interpret. "Her levels are unstable. We need to prep for emergency C-section. Where's anesthesia? Move! Move now!" Thomas followed until someone physically stopped him at the OR doors. "Sir, you can't go in yet." "That's my wife!" he shouted. The surgeon stepped forward. "Mr. Prescott, we're doing everything we can for her and the babies. Please wait here." The hallway lights blurred. Seconds felt like hours. Then, a cry. High-pitched, desperate, new, "Baby 1." Then another cry. "Baby 2." Then a softer cry. "Baby 3." 3 tiny voices. 3 pieces of hope. A nurse rushed past with incubators. "They're small, but they're alive," she said. "Girls, just like the scans showed. We're taking them to NICU." And before Thomas could respond, a different nurse stepped out of the OR. Her eyes told him everything before she spoke. "Mr. Prescott, we need to talk." His world split in half. The explanation was long, too long. Words like hemorrhage, cardiac arrest, Uncontrollable bleeding, unresponsive. Thomas barely heard any of it. He only heard the sentence that destroyed him. She didn't make it. His knees hit the floor. GW Hospital's NICU was dim and humming with machines. Somewhere deep in the maze of incubators, 3 tiny girls fought for their lives. Ava first, then Lila, then Grace. Tiny fingers, tiny breaths, tiny hopes. He stood between their incubators, one hand on each plastic wall, whispering through tears. Your mom loved you. She loved you so, so much. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. NICU nurses treated him gently, too gently, as though he might collapse if spoken to too loudly. He learned oxygen levels, heart rate alarms, feeding schedules. He signed papers he didn't remember reading. He slept in the chair beside their incubators, tie crooked, hair unkempt, eyes hollowed by grief. But the universe wasn't done. 3 months later, after endless tests, MRIs, and developmental assessments, the pediatric neurologist delivered another blow. All 3 girls meet the diagnostic criteria for cerebral palsy. Severe. Thomas felt the floor tilt beneath him. Will they walk? He asked. A long silence. We don't anticipate meaningful mobility. Mobility. Meaningful. Likelihood. Prognosis. Words that became chains around his heart. Back home in Georgetown, the Prescott mansion felt emptier than the NICU. The nursery Olivia had decorated sunflowers, watercolor animals, cribs arranged in a sunbeam became a shrine he couldn't enter. Instead, Thomas poured himself into caregiving schedules like a CEO managing a failing company. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, neurodevelopment sessions, adaptive equipment training, feeding tubes, breathing monitors, medication logs. He made lists. He hired specialists. He fired the ones who felt careless. He installed cameras in every room. He stopped answering social invitations. He stopped smiling. One night, as he sat beside the girls' medical bassinets, he realized something quietly devastating. He wasn't grieving anymore. He wasn't healing either. He was simply surviving. And survival has a way of shrinking a person. Before he knew it, hope had become a luxury he no longer allowed himself. Despite every effort, nothing changed. Ava couldn't lift her head. Lila couldn't unclench her fists. Grace rarely opened her eyes. Their first birthday came and went with quiet balloons and a cake none of them could eat. Thomas lit 3 candles. Make a wish, the nurse said. He wished for anything but the life he was standing in. But when he looked at his daughters, so fragile, so still, a new kind of acceptance began to settle over him. Maybe this was the life they were meant to have. Maybe all he could do now was maintain it. And maybe miracles were for other people. As he sat there in that silent house, listening to 3 monitors beep in the dark, Thomas felt something he hated. The quiet fear that he was beginning to give up on his own children. If you've ever known that kind of fear, if you've ever watched someone you love struggle while you stood powerless, then stay with this story. Because what happened next? What happened when a woman named Keisha Morgan entered this house? It didn't just change the girls. It changed him. And so the stage was set. 3 fragile girls, a grieving father, a mansion full of cameras, and a future that looked painfully small. But change doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it walks through your door wearing scrubs, humming a soft tune, and seeing light where you only saw shadow. And that is exactly how the story of the 12th caregiver began. The Prescott mansion in Georgetown had become a silent fortress by the time Keisha Morgan stepped through its doors. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace. It was the silence of absence. Absence of laughter. Absence of hope. Absence of anything resembling a life. Historic Georgetown homes have personalities, some warm, some eccentric, some old and wise, but the Prescott estate had turned cold, heavy. Its sweeping staircases, polished walnut floors, antique chandeliers, and framed Senate invitations all felt like relics from a life that no longer belonged to anyone. Thomas knew it too. He could feel the emptiness every time he crossed the foyer. So, when he heard a soft knock on the front door that Monday morning, he didn't move at first. He didn't want to meet caregiver number 12. Didn't want to hope she might work out. Didn't want to watch another person fail his daughters or disappoint him in ways he knew too well. But eventually, he straightened his tie, set his jaw, and walked toward the door with the same dread other men reserved for funerals. When he opened it, the woman standing on the steps was not what he expected. She wore plain navy scrubs, a canvas messenger bag slung across one shoulder, and thick black curls pulled into a low bun. Her eyes were dark, alert, but somehow warm at the same time, like the kind of person children naturally trusted. "Mr. Prescott?" she asked. Her voice surprised him. Gentle, but steady. A caregiver's voice, except not one he had ever heard. "Yes." His tone was clipped, measured. "You must be Miss Morgan. Keisha is fine." He stepped aside without smiling. "Come in." She entered the foyer, glancing up at the marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the ornate molding. She didn't gawk the way some caregivers had, not impressed, not intimidated, just observant. It unsettled him. Thomas led her through the hall, past rooms so pristine they felt unlived. Passing the solarium, the dining room, the library, even the air felt carefully preserved. "You've reviewed the care plan?" he asked without turning. "I have," she answered. "All 76 pages." He paused. "Most applicants skim," she shrugged. "Your daughters deserve more than skimming." He wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he didn't. Her footsteps were quiet behind him, but he could feel her studying the house. People always did. Some envied it. Some feared it. Keisha seemed to do neither. He stopped outside the girls' therapy room. Cameras sat discreetly in corners, their tiny LED indicators glowing red. A nurse finished adjusting Grace's feeding pump and nodded to Thomas before slipping out the side door. Inside the room, 3 little girls lay in adapted recliners, wrapped in soft blankets patterned with sunflowers. Ava, closest to the window, blinked slowly at the change of light. Lila stared up at the mobile turning overhead. Grace's breathing was shallow, beneath her blanket, but steady. Keisha stepped forward quietly, as though entering a sacred place. Thomas watched her. Most new caregivers rushed straight to equipment or charts. Few approached the girls first. Keisha crouched beside Ava. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm Keisha. I'm going to take good care of you, okay?" Ava didn't respond, not with a look, not with a twitch. Thomas expected Keisha to pull back, startled or uncomfortable. Instead, she smiled softly and touched the back of Ava's hand with her fingertip, a gesture so light it seemed like a question rather than a statement. "Beautiful name," she murmured. "Ava Prescott. That's the kind of name you see on ballet programs and science fair ribbons." Thomas stiffened. She didn't know that Olivia had chosen the names for that exact reason. She didn't know how precise those dreams had once been. He cleared his throat. "These are my daughters, Ava, Lila, and Grace. They require full support. Their mobility is extremely limited, as you saw in the documentation." Keisha nodded. "Yes, I did. We maintain a strict protocol. Physical therapy 4 times a week. Range of motion exercises twice daily. Feeding and breathing equipment checks every 2 hours." "Understood. There are cameras in every room," he added. "Including this one." Keisha glanced at one of them, then looked back at him. "Understood," she said again, but this time with the faintest hint of challenge. Or was it confidence? He couldn't tell. He didn't like it. Thomas handed her a tablet. "This contains access to the girls' real-time data, health metrics, medication schedules, everything you need." Keisha accepted it carefully. "Thank you. But," he held up a hand, "you follow the plan exactly as written. No deviations, no improvisation, no creative instincts." She studied him for a moment. "I understand your concerns," she said. "You've had bad experiences." "More than bad," he replied. "Disastrous." Keisha nodded once. Slowly. "I'll do my job." but I'll also treat them like children, not projects. His jaw tightened. She didn't apologize for it. When the nurse left them alone, Keisha slipped off her bag and rolled up her sleeves, approaching Leela first. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, smoothing Lila's curls. "Can I move your arm a bit?" Lila did not react. She rarely did. Keisha placed a hand beneath her elbow and gently lifted it, rotating with slow, practiced motions. She hummed under her breath, a low, warm melody that softened the edges of the room. Thomas frowned. "This is not the prescribed rotation sequence," he said sharply. Keisha didn't look up. "Actually, it is. Page 32. Except the manual doesn't specify music. I do that part for free." He said nothing, but his irritation flickered. She moved on to Grace, adjusting her recliner angle, checking her oxygen line. Grace's eyelids fluttered, the closest she came to acknowledgement. "And Miss Grace," Keisha whispered fondly, "one day you're going to surprise all of us, aren't you?" Thomas's chest tightened at the certainty in her voice, dangerous, unrealistic certainty. Hope was a gamble he no longer played. By late afternoon, Thomas observed her from the hallway. Keisha didn't rush, didn't treat the girls like fragile statues, didn't look intimidated by the severity of their condition. Instead, she talked to them, sang to them, touched them gently on the forehead as if checking for dreams. She even laughed once, a soft, musical sound that didn't belong in this house anymore. Thomas felt something old and painful stir in his chest. The sound reminded him of Olivia. Not the pitch, just the intention. Warmth, joy, defiance. He hated that. He hated that the woman was behaving like his daughters were more than their medical charts. But he also couldn't look away. At one point, Keisha lifted Grace slightly to reposition her pillows. Grace whimpered a weak, thin sound. Keisha froze. "Oh, honey." "Shh, I'm right here," she soothed, gently rocking her. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. That sound, Grace's cry. It had been Olivia's last memory of them. 3 newborn cries echoing down a surgical hallway. The sound that marked both life and loss. He turned away abruptly, gripping the doorway. He told himself it was because Keisha was touching Grace incorrectly. But the truth was simpler. Her tenderness hurt. By evening, the house felt different. Not bright, not healed, but disturbed, like a long closed window had been opened, and a draft was unsettling the dust. Keisha returned the tablet to Thomas. "They did well today," she said. "They didn't move," he replied flatly. "Not everything worth noticing is movement." He stiffened. "Meaning?" She met his eyes, not intimidated. "Meaning, presence matters. Voice matters. Touch matters. Even if you don't see it right away." Thomas's expression hardened. "I expect measurable results, Miss Morgan." Keisha smiled faintly. "And I expect miracles." It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't naivety. It was belief. Real belief. And it rattled him. When the house was quiet, and the triplets slept in their adaptive cribs, Thomas retreated to his office. He turned on his monitors, 6 of them, each displaying a different room feed from the mansion. He didn't know why he checked. Habit, maybe. Fear, definitely. But what he saw on the living room camera made him inhale sharply. Keisha knelt beside Ava's recliner, adjusting the blanket that had slipped during the night. But then, she didn't walk away. She placed one hand over Ava's chest and whispered, "You are not broken, sweetheart. You are not less. And one day, whether anyone believes it or not, your story is going to change." The words were soft. Too soft for anyone to hear. Unless you were the kind of man who watched every camera in every room because you no longer trusted the world with what remained of your heart. Thomas's eyes burned. He shut off the monitors abruptly. He didn't want to hear hope. He wasn't ready. Not yet. But someone else was. His daughters. Keisha Morgan had only been in the home for one day. One day. And already, things felt different. Not visibly, not measurably, but in the small, intangible ways that signal change long before it arrives. Thomas didn't know it yet, but something had just shifted inside his fortress of grief, something that would eventually crack it open completely. And he wasn't the only one who felt it. The second morning of Keisha Morgan's employment began before sunrise, quiet, cold, and unusually still for Georgetown. Fog curled along the Potomac, creeping between the narrow brick streets and wrapping itself around the Prescott home like a shroud. But inside, something had shifted. It wasn't visible, not measurable. But the energy had changed. Subtle, gentle, unsettling. Thomas felt it as soon as he entered the kitchen. He expected silence. He expected steel countertops and coffee machines humming like machines instead of companions. He expected routine. What he found instead was warmth. Keisha stood at the long marble counter, sleeves rolled up, heating water in a kettle not for baby formula, but for tea. Beside her sat 3 tiny knitted socks, each a different pastel color. Thomas paused. "What are those?" Keisha didn't look up. "I knitted all night. Grace's feet get cold faster than the others." He frowned. "They have medical socks. These are softer." She glanced at him. "Comfort matters too." He didn't respond. He didn't know how. Comfort was something he hadn't considered in a long time, something he'd associated with before. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. She shrugged. "I'm used to long nights. NICU nurses don't exactly get beauty rest." He nodded reluctantly. She had worked NICU, that was part of why he hired her. But knitting socks? At 3 a.m.? Who did that? He opened his mouth to say something, but the nurse on duty rushed into the kitchen. Mr. Prescott. Ava's monitor showed a mild spike. Thomas stiffened. "Blood pressure?" "No, respiratory. It leveled out, but I wanted to report it immediately." He nodded. "I'll check the feed." But before he could pull out his phone, Keisha wiped her hands and walked past him toward the hallway. "I'll go see her," she said. "She hears my voice now." Thomas blinked. "She hears?" "Miss Morgan. We don't know that she recognizes." She paused in the doorway. "Children know who's safe, Mr. Prescott, even when they can't say so." She left. Thomas remained frozen, confused by how easily she had walked through his boundaries, through the emotional structure he'd built around caregiving. Yet somehow, instead of resenting her confidence, something inside him softened. For one strange, unwelcome second, he was grateful she'd come. When Thomas reached the therapy room, Keisha was already sitting beside Ava's recliner, leaning close and humming softly. Her voice was low but melodic, filling the sterile room with something warm enough to melt morning frost. Ava's heart rate, visible on the portable monitor, was stabilizing. The slight spike had already faded. "How did you know what to do?" Thomas asked. Keisha touched Ava's cheek gently. "Babies respond to regulation, especially when they're scared. Music helps slow their breathing." Thomas crossed his arms. "The manual doesn't mention music." She smiled faintly. The manual was written by someone who's never tried calming a baby at 3 a.m. He didn't appreciate the humor, but he couldn't deny the results. Ava's readings were better. Her body looked calmer. And then Keisha did something that stopped him cold. She lifted Ava into her arms, not roughly, not carelessly, carefully, but without permission. "What are you doing?" he said sharply. "Bonding," Keisha answered simply. "That's not part of your duties." "That's not true." She rocked Ava gently. "Every caregiver's duty is connection. Without that, none of the therapy matters." "Put her down," he insisted, stepping forward. "Ava needs spinal support." "I know," Keisha said. "I supported the lumbar before lifting her." "You can check." He didn't want to check, because if she had done it correctly, then she knew more about his daughters than he was ready to accept. But the truth was right in front of him. Ava's muscles, usually stiff with spastic tension, seemed softer. Her breathing didn't hitch. Her fingers uncurled slightly around Keisha's shirt. Thomas forced himself to look away. "No improvisation," he said firmly. That was the agreement. Keisha didn't flinch, didn't apologize. This isn't improvisation, she said quietly. It's care. And for the first time since Olivia's death, someone in that house had spoken to him like he wasn't a billionaire. Not a man with resources. Not a man with a reputation. Just a father. Later that morning, Keisha kneeled beside Lila's therapy mat, preparing for range-of-motion exercises. Thomas watched from the doorway. Keisha stretched Lila's arms first, then her legs. Slow, rhythmic, gentle. But then Keisha did something completely outside of protocol. She placed a small red rattle into Lila's hand. Thomas's stomach dropped. That's not safe, she can't grip. Watch, Keisha murmured. She lifted the rattle just slightly above Lila's line of vision, shaking it softly. Lila, sweetheart, follow it. Lila didn't move. Thomas exhaled. You see? She doesn't. Then, Lila's eyes flickered. Just barely. Just enough. Toward the rattle, Thomas's hand clenched around the doorframe. That's coincidence, he whispered. Keisha frowned. Do you know how many NICU doctors told me that? Coincidence every time a baby fought harder than the textbooks predicted. She shook the rattle again. Follow it, baby girl. I know you can. Lila's eyes moved. Clearer this time. Slower. But undeniably purposeful. Thomas's throat thickened. He forced himself to swallow. It's early reflex. Nothing more. Keisha looked at him, then really looked. With all due respect, Mr. Prescott, she said softly, your daughters are not dead inside. They respond. They notice. They feel. If you stop expecting small miracles, you'll never see them. He froze. She'd said the one thing he worked years to avoid. Miracles. Hope had teeth. Hope disappointed. He couldn't afford to hope. But his daughter just followed an object with her eyes for the first time in over a year. And he couldn't unsee that. The youngest triplet, Grace, remained the mystery. The smallest. The most fragile. The one doctor said had the lowest mobility prospects. Keisha approached her crib slowly, sensing the delicacy of her system. Hey there, Angel, she whispered. Let's see how you're feeling today. Grace stayed still. Her tiny fingers curled against her blanket. Her breaths were shallow but steady, what the doctors called baseline unstable stability. Keisha didn't begin with movement. She began with presence. She leaned close and spoke softly. You don't know me yet, but you will. And I'm going to stay right beside you until you're ready to tell us what's going on in that busy little mind of yours. Thomas swallowed hard. Olivia had spoken that way. As if their daughters were already listening before they were even born. Keisha placed a warm hand over Grace's chest, letting her feel the steady weight of human contact. It's okay, she murmured. Take your time. Grace didn't move, didn't blink, didn't respond. But after a moment, her foot twitched. A tiny, nearly invisible twitch. Keisha saw it instantly. There it is, she whispered. I feel you. Thomas's chest tightened painfully. He had stopped noticing those small twitches, stopped believing they mattered, stopped counting things that didn't add up to progress. But Keisha counted them, every single one. And for the first time, he wondered if he had stopped paying attention to the very children he had fought so hard to save. Later in the afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the tall windows, Thomas stood beside Keisha while she prepared the girls for their next therapy session. He spoke without looking at her. How long have you been doing this kind of work? 10 years, she answered. NICU, pediatric neuro, in-home support. And you believe, he hesitated, that children like mine can improve? Keisha didn't respond right away. She adjusted Ava's harness, smoothed Lila's curls, checked Grace's oxygen line. Only then did she speak. I believe the body remembers what the mind fights for, even when the doctors say otherwise. He felt something inside him shift. Doctors are rarely wrong, he said. They're rarely illusioned. She corrected gently. There's a difference. He turned to her, startled. Keisha took a breath. Doctors look at data. I Look at children. Your daughters are more than charts, Mr. Prescott. But someone has to see that before anything changes. He stiffened. You're suggesting I don't see them? No, she said softly. I'm saying you see their pain, but you stop seeing their possibilities. His breath left him in a single shaky exhale. He had no response, because it was true. Olivia had been the dreamer. He had become the realist, and then, somehow, the realist had become blind. Late in the day, something happened that would haunt him long after. Keisha encouraged each girl through their movements, singing softly a steady, soulful hum that filled the room with warmth unexpected in a mansion like his. Then, as she stretched Lila's arms gently upward, Lila's fingers opened, just slightly, just enough. The rattle she had been gripping fell to the mat not from lack of strength, but because her fingers had relaxed. Relaxation was progress. A big one, Keisha gasped softly. Oh my God. Lila, baby, you did that. Thomas's breath caught. No, he whispered. She can't unclench like that. She just did. But she can't. Look at her. He did. Lila's tiny hand rested open on the mat, relaxed for the first time in months. Thomas felt dizzy, conflicted, hopeful, terrified. Keisha looked up at him, eyes shining. They're fighting, Mr. Prescott, she whispered. Your girls are fighting. He had nothing to say. Not because he doubted it, but because he finally believed her. As dusk settled over Georgetown and the Potomac glimmered beyond the rooftops, Thomas stood in the hallway, watching Keisha pack up her things. He had hired her reluctantly, expected nothing, prepared for failure. But in just 48 hours, she had disturbed everything he thought was settled. His expectations, his certainty, his grief, even his daughter's limitations. The air in the house felt different now, warmer, lighter, alive. He wasn't ready to call it hope, but something was happening, something real, and he was about to learn just how powerful it could become. By the fourth morning of Keisha Morgan's employment, the Prescott mansion no longer felt like a museum of grief. Not yet a home, no. Thomas wasn't ready to call it that. But something inside the air had shifted like the faintest draft finding a crack in a sealed window. Summer sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors, warming the hallway outside the therapy room. Thomas paused there longer than necessary, hand hovering over the doorknob. He didn't know why. Maybe because he could already hear soft humming from inside. Maybe because he wasn't ready to confront what those sounds stirred inside him. Maybe because the house had been silent for so long that any new sound felt intrusive. He finally pushed the door open. What he saw made him stop completely. The therapy room was flooded with golden morning light. The triplets sat in their adaptive recliners, and Keisha knelt on the mat between them, tapping a small drum with the gentleness of someone coaxing a heartbeat. Ava's eyes were open, fully open, not drifting, not unfocused, but locked onto Keisha's hands. Thomas's chest tightened. As if sensing him, Keisha looked up. Morning, she said softly. You're right on time, he frowned. I thought the session started at 9. It did. They woke early. She glanced at the girls. They were ready. Ready? He echoed. Watch. She tapped the drum again. Slow. Rhythmic. Tap. 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 Ava blinked in perfect time with the beats. Not delayed. Not random. Intentional. Thomas stepped closer. She's following the rhythm? Yes. Keisha smiled. And she's been doing it for at least 30 minutes. He didn't believe her. He didn't want to believe her because if he let this moment mean something, the weight of what he hadn't noticed for months might crush him. But the evidence was right in front of him. Ava blinked again. On cue. 3 beats. 3 responses. That's not possible, he whispered. Keisha only hummed. Lila had never been the expressive one. Her therapist notes described her as minimally reactive, inconsistent, and unlikely to demonstrate voluntary tracking. But today, as Keisha lifted a red cloth puppet, simple, soft, playful, Lila's eyes widened. Hey there, sweetheart, Keisha cooed. Look who's come to visit you today. She wiggled the puppet gently. Leela's gaze followed it, cleanly, smoothly, like a child tracking a butterfly in a garden. Thomas felt dizzy. How? His voice cracked. How is she doing that? Practice, Keisha said. Repetition, warmth, and someone talking to her like she's capable. He swallowed hard. She was never able to. She was never given the chance, Keisha corrected, not unkindly. Thomas's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, wanted to retreat behind data and charts, wanted to insist that the specialist had already explained everything. But Lila blinked deliberately once, twice, 3 times as if confirming what he was seeing, and there was no argument strong enough to undo the truth. Then came Grace. Sweet, silent Grace. Her body was tinier than her sister's, frailer. Her prognosis the most discouraging. She'd always seemed stuck in some quiet place Thomas couldn't reach. Keisha approached her slowly, as though stepping into another realm entirely. I know you hear me, she whispered, kneeling beside her. You don't have to show me everything at once. Just something. Anything you're ready for. She rested her hand lightly on Grace's leg. Thomas watched, breath shallow. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room was still except for the faint whir of the air purifier and Keisha's soft humming. And then, Grace's toes curled, not reflexively, not spasmodically, but intentionally curling, then uncurling. Slow as honey, Keisha gasped quietly. There you are, she whispered. I've been waiting for you. Thomas pressed a hand to his forehead. His eyes burned, his throat tightened. That motion so tiny it could have been mist shattered him. Because he had missed it, over and over again, in the months before Keisha came. But she hadn't. She saw what he'd stopped looking for. Later that afternoon, Thomas stepped into the hallway, heart pounding, mind spinning. He needed space. He needed oxygen. He needed time to process. But the truth followed him like a shadow. His daughters were improving. And not because of the rigid medical systems he'd built around them, not because of the equipment he'd purchased or the protocols he'd memorized, because of her. Because Keisha Morgan believed in something he had buried long ago. He leaned against the hallway wall, eyes closed. He hadn't felt this combination of fear and hope since the day Olivia told him she was pregnant. It was painful, alive, sharp. He didn't know how to hold it. When he finally returned to the therapy room, Keisha was packing up toys into a canvas bin. Can we talk? He asked. She looked up, cautious. Of course. How did you do it? Do what? He gestured helplessly at the girls. All of it. The blinking, the tracking, the muscle movement. No one, not a single doctor has gotten responses like that from them. Keisha didn't flinch. Then maybe the doctors weren't looking in the right direction, she said softly. He stiffened. That sounds like criticism. It's observation. And what are you observing now? That you're terrified, Keisha replied gently. Because hope is starting to feel real again. Thomas felt punched in the gut. He turned away. You're assuming things you shouldn't, he said. You don't know our history. You don't know what we've tried. I know grief when I see it, Keisha answered quietly. And I know what happens when grief becomes routine. His jaw clenched. She continued. Your daughters are responding because someone is speaking to them directly, touching them gently, giving them space to attempt something new without assuming failure first. You're implying I assumed failure, he snapped. She didn't retreat. I'm saying you assume certainty, she replied. And certainty leaves no room for miracles. The room fell silent. Thomas felt his pulse hammering in his throat. He hated that she was right. He hated even more that he needed to hear it. That night, he did something he hadn't done in over a year. He sat beside each girl's crib long after Keisha left. He touched their hands, whispered to them, told them stories Olivia used to tell, allowed himself just for a moment to imagine a future where their bodies might surprise him. He held Grace's tiny fingers and murmured, I'm sorry I didn't look sooner. He stroked Ava's hair. "You're doing so well." He kissed Lila's forehead. "I'm here. I'm really here." And for the first time, his daughters seemed to understand something, not the words, but the presence behind them. Ava blinked twice, slow and deliberate. Lila relaxed her tiny fist. Grace's breathing steadied, softer than it had been in months. Thomas exhaled a broken laugh. Something was happening in this home. Something fragile, beautiful, and terrifying. He just didn't know yet how far it would go. Before he left the room, Thomas turned and looked at all three of them, small, quiet, undeservedly brave. And he thought about the people who might watch a moment like this and recognize themselves in it. Because if you've ever loved someone who couldn't fight for themselves, if you've ever carried hope alone in the dark, if you've ever needed one reason, just one, to believe again, stay with this story. Some journeys don't get easier. They just get truer. And this one is about to get very, very real. Tomorrow, something would break. Not the girls, not Keisha, but Thomas, because belief is dangerous. It exposes everything a man tries to bury. And in the days to come, the walls around his heart wouldn't just crack. They would collapse. For 2 days, Thomas Prescott had avoided the therapy room, not out of neglect, not out of anger, but because he was afraid of what waited for him there. Hope had crept into his Georgetown mansion like a draft under a locked door, quiet, persistent, and impossible to control. And hope, to a grieving man, was not a gift. It was a threat. Still, by Thursday morning, the tension inside his chest grew unbearable. He couldn't avoid the inevitable, so he made his way down the long walnut hallway, past portraits of Prescott ancestors, each painted in stiff poses that felt accusatory now. Your wife is gone. Your daughters are broken. Your house is a mausoleum. Why pretend otherwise? He tightened his jaw and pushed open the therapy room door. The sight inside made him freeze. Keisha Morgan was on the floor, sitting cross-legged with a wooden stacking toy in her lap. Lila sat in her adaptive chair nearby, head supported by a cushioned brace, eyes locked on the brightly colored rings. Grace was propped at a gentle incline, her oxygen line secure, her tiny fingers curled loosely around a soft textured ball. Ava lay across Keisha's lap in prone position on her stomach, which was strictly forbidden without a specialist present, according to every medical binder in the house. Thomas's heart jumped into his throat. "What are you doing?" he snapped. Keisha didn't flinch. "Good morning to you too." "That position is unsafe," he barked. "Ava needs full spinal support when prone." "She has it." Keisha raised an eyebrow. "See my hand under her pelvis? She's supported. And she needs tummy time for neck strength." "You're not a physical therapist." "No," she said evenly. "But I've worked beside them for a decade. That is not the same thing. It is when your goal is the child, not the credential." His pulse spiked. "Put her back in her chair," he ordered sharply. "Now." Keisha stared at him, calm in the face of his rising panic. "I'm not hurting her, Mr. Prescott. I'm helping her." The steadiness in her tone infuriated him. He took a step into the room. "You don't know that. You don't get to decide what risks are acceptable." "Neither do you," she said quietly. "If all your decisions come from fear." The words hit him like a slap. "Excuse me?" Keisha set the wooden toy aside and lowered Ava gently onto her side, making sure every limb was supported. "You heard me," she said, standing slowly. "You're not making choices based on your daughter's potential. You're making choices based on your trauma." His stomach clenched. Trauma. The word hung between them like smoke. "You don't get to use that word with me," he said, voice trembling. "You don't know me." Keisha met his gaze without wavering. "I know what it looks like when a parent stops imagining a future for their child." His breath caught. He felt exposed, seen in a way he didn't want to be. "You think I don't imagine a future for them?" he hissed. "I've sacrificed everything." "You've survived," she interrupted gently. "That's not the same thing." A muscle in his jaw twitched. She took a cautious step forward. "Thomas, The first time she had used his first name, it shook him. "Your daughters are alive," she whispered. "Alive and responsive, and capable of more than you think. But they need a father who sees the possibility in them, not just their limitations." He turned away, chest tight. Her words dug at something raw inside him. Limitations. Possibilities. He didn't know which terrified him more. "Sit down," Keisha said softly. Not an order. A plea. He didn't respond. "Thomas." She tried again. "Please sit." He sank into one of the therapy chairs as though pulled by gravity. "I know you're scared," she continued. "And I know why. Everything about their condition is unknown. And unknowns hurt." He closed his eyes. His voice dropped to a whisper. "When Olivia died," he couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't breathe past it. Keisha knelt beside him. "You don't have to explain it," she said gently. "But you do have to admit what it did to you." He swallowed hard, throat burning. "I lost everything," he whispered. "No," she said softly. "You almost did. But those girls, those 3 tiny miracles, they're still here, and they are trying." He opened his eyes then. Her face was close, expression fierce but patient. "You need to let them try," she whispered. The words hit him deeper than any he had heard since the day his world cracked open in a hospital hallway. He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "I don't know how." "You don't need to know how," Keisha said. "You just need to stop stopping them." The simplicity of it was painful. He turned to look at Ava, who now lay calmly in her recliner, watching him with unfocused but peaceful eyes. "She looks comfortable," he murmured. "I know," Keisha replied. "And Lila followed the puppet better today," Keisha said softly. "Her tracking is improving. And Grace lifted her leg earlier," Keisha said. Tiny motion. But it was real. He shook his head slowly. All 3. Progress in all 3. It terrified him more than their stagnation ever had. Because if hope returned, if he allowed himself to believe, he could lose it all again. "What if it stops?" he whispered. Keisha sat beside him, folding her legs beneath her. "Then we try again tomorrow," she shrugged lightly. "And the next day, and the next, until trying becomes progress." He stared at her hands. Steady. Sure. Unshakable. How long had it been since he felt steady? "Thomas," Keisha said gently, "your daughters don't need perfect outcomes. They need presence." He looked at her sharply. "I am present." "No," she said, without meanness. "Not in the way they need." He stood abruptly. "You don't know what they need." "Yes," she said, standing too. "I do." She walked to the recliners and touched each girl's forehead gently, one by one. "They need someone who believes in them," she whispered. "Someone who doesn't let fear speak louder than love." He flinched. "And right now," she said gently, "fear is the only voice you're listening to." His composure snapped. "You come into my home," he ground out, "without understanding what I've lived through, what I've lost, and you dare tell me how to love my children? How to protect them? You know nothing about the decisions I've had to make." Keisha didn't retreat. "I know you love them," she shot back, "but love without hope becomes imprisonment." He sucked in a sharp breath. "And you are imprisoning yourself," she whispered. "Not them." He stepped back as though struck. The room spun. He didn't want to hear this. He couldn't hear this. But she wasn't finished. "I am not your enemy," she said softly. "But your fear is." For a long time, they stood staring at each other. 2 people carrying grief in different shapes, meeting in the middle for the first time. Finally, Thomas spoke, voice barely audible. "What if I believe again? And I lose them too?" Keisha's eyes softened in a way that disarmed him completely. "Then you will have loved them fully for however long you had them," she whispered. "And that is better than not loving them at all." His shoulders shook. He turned away, pressing a hand over his eyes. For the first time in years, someone had voiced the fear he'd buried deepest. That hope was a luxury Olivia could afford. But he couldn't. He swallowed hard. I don't know if I can do what you're asking. You don't have to, Keisha said gently. Not alone. He opened his eyes. She reached out slowly, not touching him, but offering her hand in the space between them. I'm right here, she whispered. And I'm not leaving. His breath caught. He didn't take her hand. Not yet. But he also didn't retreat. Just then, Grace made a small sound, a breathy coo, faint but intentional. Ava blinked twice. Lila's fingers fluttered. Keisha smiled softly. They're listening, she whispered. They always are. Thomas stared at his daughters. For once, he didn't see diagnoses. He didn't see prognoses. He saw possibility. Raw, fragile, terrifying possibility. Something had changed in him. Not enough to call it hope. Not enough to call it trust. But something. Keisha had cracked open a door he'd nailed shut years ago. And through that crack, a sliver of light had slipped in. Small, unsteady, but unmistakably real. Tomorrow, the therapist would arrive, and what she found would shift everything again. Because improvement was one thing, proof was another. The next morning arrived with a strange kind of tension, one that hummed beneath the surface of the Prescott mansion like an electrical current waiting for release. A storm hung low over Washington, D.C. Thick gray clouds crawled across the Potomac, dimming Georgetown's brick streets and casting the entire neighborhood in a heavy, muted light. The mansion felt different under the storm, less pristine, less quiet, more expectant. Today wasn't just another therapy day. Today, Dr. Naomi Hart, the triplets' licensed pediatric neurodevelopment specialist, was coming. Thomas had called her the moment he noticed the girls' changes, tiny as they were. He needed confirmation. He needed truth. He needed someone other than Keisha to tell him he wasn't imagining everything. If there was one person in the city he trusted with his daughter's medical journey, it was Dr. Hart. She had been there since the NICU days. She knew every chart, every MRI, every fragile milestone the girls failed to reach. She was brilliant, clinical, and almost frighteningly honest. And she had never, not once, given Thomas false hope. That, more than anything, terrified him about today. At 9:04 a.m., her car pulled up to the circular driveway, a sleek black Audi bearing a Washington Hospital Center parking permit. Dr. Hart emerged. Umbrella in one hand, leather medical case in the other. Her posture was sharp, her expression unreadable, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was not the kind of woman who sugar-coated anything. Mr. Prescott, she greeted as Thomas opened the door. Her tone was curt, professional, not unfriendly, but emotionally distant. She was exactly the way he remembered. Doctor, thank you for coming. You said the girls have shown unusual responses. Not improvement. Not progress. Just unusual responses. She rarely wasted adjectives. Yes, he replied. Some movements. Some visual tracking. I'll need to observe. She stepped inside. Where is their caregiver today? The new one you hired? Keisha is in the therapy room with them. Dr. Hart raised an eyebrow. Good. I prefer watching children respond to the person they see most consistently. Thomas exhaled. He had no idea what was about to happen. Keisha looked up when they entered the therapy room, her eyes warm but steady. Dr. Hart, she said respectfully. I'm Keisha Morgan. It's good to meet you. Dr. Hart gave a crisp nod. I've reviewed your records. NICU background. That will be helpful. Thank you, Keisha replied softly. But Thomas saw the tension in her shoulders, subtle but present. Keisha was confident, but this was the moment her work would be judged. Dr. Hart first approached Ava. Her movements were precise, her gloves snapping into place with clinical efficiency. Let's begin with baseline response, she said. Thomas's pulse thudded. Ava rarely reacted to touch, rarely lifted her head, rarely focused. Dr. Hart lifted a small penlight, shining it gently across Ava's field of vision. Follow the light, she instructed, a command that had always been met with blankness. Ava blinked, a slow blink, then another. Dr. Hart paused. Blinking isn't necessarily tracking. It's reflexive when the light is bright. Keisha stepped forward. Try moving the light slower. Dr. Hart shot her a sharp look. She did not enjoy being told how to conduct an exam. But she moved the light slower anyway. Ava's eyes followed. Left, then right. With intent. Thomas's breath hitched. Dr. Hart froze. Her expression flickered confusion first, then focus, then something dangerously close to awe. Again, she said. Keisha held her breath. Ava followed the light a second time. Not random, not reflexive, purposeful. Dr. Hart stepped back slowly, eyes narrowing, recalculating everything she thought she knew about this child. This, she murmured, this is new. Thomas swallowed hard. His hands were trembling. Yes, Keisha whispered. She's been doing that. Next was Lila. Dr. Hart positioned a colorful toy above her, something bright and contrast-rich, meant to stimulate visual pursuit. Let's test tracking reflex, she said. She moved the toy slowly. Lila followed it instantly. Smooth, clean. With more control than yesterday. Thomas expected Dr. Hart to show surprise, but she didn't, not externally. She simply leaned closer, studying Lila's pupils. How many times has she done this? She asked Keisha. 3 days in a row, Keisha replied. Once for nearly 15 seconds. Dr. Hart raised an eyebrow. 15 seconds of continuous tracking? That's unlikely. I know, Keisha said gently, but I saw it. Thomas watched them carefully. Dr. Hart wasn't doubting Keisha. She was recalibrating her entire understanding of the girl's potential. Again, she said. Lila followed the object again, then blinked right on cue when Dr. Hart tapped the toy lightly on the table. Dr. Hart exhaled. Remarkable. Thomas felt something crack open inside him. Remarkable. A word he had never, in 2 years, heard applied to his daughters. Grace was last. Dr. Hart approached her crib with the delicate caution of someone approaching fragile glass. Miss Grace, she murmured, let's see how you're doing today. She lifted Grace gently, supporting her spine, checking her oxygen line. Grace didn't react. She rarely did. Dr. Hart checked muscle tone, severe hypotonia. Checked reflexes still limited. Checked eye responsiveness minimal. Then she reached for a soft-textured ball, placing it lightly against Grace's foot. Push, she said softly. Nothing. Grace, sweetheart, Keisha whispered, kneeling beside her. You can do this. I know you can. Dr. Hart shifted her position. Push, she repeated. And then, Grace's toes curled. Her foot lifted, tiny but unmistakable. Her ankle flexed. Dr. Hart jerked upright, eyes wide. Do that again. Grace, Keisha said. You're safe. Try again, baby. Grace pushed again. Stronger this time. Dr. Hart covered her mouth with one hand, a rare break in her clinical mask. Oh, my God, she breathed. This is not possible. Not without cortical improvement. Not without significant therapy changes. Not without... She looked at Keisha sharply, almost accusingly. What have you been doing with them? Keisha looked startled. Just what felt right. Warmth, song, connection, practice. Every hour. That's not neurological intervention. No, Keisha replied. But it's human intervention. Thomas couldn't breathe, because someone else was finally seeing it. Someone else was finally seeing them. Dr. Hart removed her gloves slowly, as if her hands needed time to catch up to her realization. Mr. Prescott, she said, turning to him. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tremor beneath. Yes, he whispered. I need to change their treatment plan. Thomas blinked. I'm sorry? Your daughters, she said, are showing signs of neurological responsiveness that I did not anticipate. Responsiveness that contradicts their initial prognosis. His heart stopped. You're saying they're improving? I'm saying, Dr. Hart replied carefully, Their brains are communicating with their bodies in new ways. She shook her head in disbelief. This level of progress is extremely rare, and almost never spontaneous. It usually requires months of intense, consistent sensory stimulation and emotional engagement. She turned to Keisha. And it is clear to me that Miss Morgan has been providing exactly that. Thomas stared at Keisha, and something inside him shifted. Something deep, quiet, and overwhelming. Gratitude, fear, awe, all tangled together. "Dr. Hart," he whispered, voice breaking. "What does this mean for their future?" She took a breath. "Right now?" she said softly. "It means there is more potential in your daughters than any of us dared to consider." His knees weakened. Keisha moved closer, not touching him, but standing steady beside him in a way that anchored him to the floor. "And long-term?" he asked, barely able to form the words. Dr. Hart's eyes softened. "That depends," she said, "on whether you continue to let people like Miss Morgan work with them." The room went silent. Thomas closed his eyes. Because, for the first time since Olivia died, he felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Real. Terrifying. Alive. As Dr. Hart began detailing changes to the girl's therapy plan, Thomas shifted his attention between her notes and Keisha's soft, steady presence beside the triplets. He realized something then. This wasn't a miracle. Not a sudden one. Anyway. This was the result of someone believing fiercely, stubbornly, endlessly, in children the world had already given up on. Tomorrow, change would accelerate. The girls would attempt things none of them imagined possible, and Thomas's fear would finally collide with the truth he had avoided for far too long. Hope wasn't the danger. Isolation was. The storm passed overnight, leaving Georgetown washed in a fresh, silvery glow. The cobblestones were slick from rain, the wrought iron balconies dripping, and the air smelled like river wind drifting up from the Potomac. Inside the Prescott mansion, however, the atmosphere felt entirely different, charged, tense, humming with new possibility. Dr. Hart's visit the day before had changed everything. Her assessments, her shock, her declaration that the girls were exhibiting neurological behaviors that should have been impossible. But the biggest change wasn't the new therapy protocols or the clinical data. It was Thomas. He woke before dawn and lay staring at the ornate ceiling. He didn't feel dread. He didn't feel numbness. He felt alert, nervous, alive. Hope, small and trembling, sat beneath his ribs like a trapped bird beating its wings. He didn't know what today would bring, and for the first time in 2 years, the uncertainty didn't paralyze him. It moved him. At 7:12 a.m., he stepped into the hallway, adjusting the sleeves of his shirt as if preparing for a board meeting, except his nerves had nothing to do with business. He paused outside the therapy room. He could hear Keisha's voice, soft, melodic, purposeful, and we're breathing, and we're stretching, and we're waking up our tiny muscles. Yes, Grace. I feel that little kick. Thomas actually smiled. A real smile. Small, almost foreign, but real. He opened the door quietly. What he saw took his breath. Keisha knelt on the therapy mat with Ava lying prone on her stomach again. Except this time, there was no fear in Thomas's chest. There was anticipation. "Morning, Mr. Prescott," Keisha said softly without looking up. "Your girl is trying something new today." Ava was pushing, weakly, wobbling, muscles trembling under her soft pajamas, but undeniably pushing her tiny arms into the mat. Her head lifted a few inches before dropping again, but she had lifted it. Thomas stepped forward, stunned. That's... Yes, Keisha whispered, neck engagement. And she did it twice before you walked in. Ava made a soft cooing sound, frustrated but trying again. She's trying to lift her whole upper body, Thomas whispered. She is, Keisha said. And she'll get better with practice. He swallowed hard. You call that practice? Keisha chuckled. Practice looks like effort, and she's giving everything she has. He sank into a nearby chair. This is happening, he murmured. half to himself. This is really happening. Now, Keisha said, turning toward Lila. Someone else asked to try something too. Lila sat in her recliner, her big brown eyes focused on a bright blue scarf in Keisha's hand. You ready? Keisha asked. Lila blinked, once slow, deliberate. A signal. Keisha dangled the scarf in front of her, letting it sway like a soft breeze. Reach for it, sweetheart, she whispered. Just a little. I'll help. She placed her hand gently against Lila's elbow, guiding her arm forward. Thomas leaned in. Nothing happened at first. Then, a flutter, a tremor, a tiny forward motion. Lila's shoulder engaged. Her elbow stiffened. Her fingers twitched open, not fully, not cleanly, but undeniably moving toward the scarf. Thomas gasped softly. She reached, he whispered. She tried, Keisha corrected gently. Trying is the first step. Trying is everything. Lila's fingers brushed the scarf, catching just a thread. Thomas covered his mouth with his hand. Lila made a small sound, something between a whimper and a sigh. Keisha kissed her forehead. You did that, she breathed. That was all you. Thomas felt heat sting behind his eyes. His daughter had reached. Grace, the quiet watcher. Grace, whose world had always seemed the smallest. Grace, who rarely opened her eyes long enough to acknowledge anything. Today, she was awake. Not wide-eyed, not animated, but awake. Keisha moved toward her with a cautious, reverent slowness. Hey, Angel, she whispered. I want to try something with you. Only if you're ready. Grace blinked once. That was enough. Keisha lifted her carefully, adjusting her oxygen line and supporting her head. Thomas held his breath. Keisha lowered Grace's feet onto the mat, supporting her upper body while letting her legs dangle gently. Grace, Keisha whispered, can you push your feet into the floor? Just a little? Nothing. Another moment passed. Still nothing. Thomas exhaled slowly, preparing for disappointment. But then, Grace's foot flexed. Not fully. Not smoothly. But she flexed her heel downward, pressing into the mat. Keisha gasped. Oh my God, Thomas, did you see that? He staggered forward, dropping to his knees to see it better. Grace did it again. A deliberate push. Weak, but purposeful. She's weight-bearing, Keisha whispered, voice trembling. She's trying to put weight into her legs. Thomas choked on a sob, soft, broken, disbelieving. My little girl, he whispered. My little girl is fighting. For a long time, the room was silent, except for breathing. His, the girl's, and Keisha's, all tangled together in a moment too sacred to touch. Then Keisha sat back on her heels, wiping her eyes. I told you, she whispered. They're trying. Thomas couldn't speak. Not yet. He moved to each child, touching their faces lightly. Ava's warm cheek, Lila's tiny hand, Grace's fragile curls. You three, he whispered, voice trembling. You're stronger than anything I ever believed. Keisha watched him, expression softening. They needed you to see that, she said quietly. He didn't look at her. I'm sorry, he murmured, voice cracking. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. They don't hold that against you, Keisha said gently. They just needed you here now. His shoulders shook. Once the girls were resting, Thomas finally asked the question he'd been afraid to ask. How did you do this? What did you do differently? Keisha hesitated. Not from secrecy, from weight. I didn't heal them, she said quietly. I didn't fix them. I didn't say you did, he replied. But I saw them, she whispered. Not their diagnoses, not their limits. Them. He swallowed, throat tight. She continued. I talked to them. Touch them gently but firmly. Let them hear rhythm. Let them feel warmth. I give their brains reasons to try things they've never tried. She placed her hand on her chest. I tell them every day that they are not broken. Thomas closed his eyes. I haven't told them anything in months, he whispered. Keisha touched his arm lightly, respectfully. You were surviving, she said. Not living, Not grieving, just surviving. And they still love you. His breath hitched. You think they know that? I know they do. He opened his eyes then. For a heartbeat, the air between them felt charged, intimate, not romantic, but deeply human. Two people carrying different kinds of grief, meeting in the middle for the first time. Keisha looked away first. Let's get them into their swings for a break. As Keisha lifted Ava into her adaptive swing, something unexpected happened. Ava laughed. A real laugh. Breathy. Small. But unmistakable. Keisha froze, staring at Thomas. Did you hear that? Hear it? He whispered. God, I felt it. Ava laughed again, kicking her tiny feet. It was the first time he'd ever heard that sound. He knelt beside her, tears rolling freely now. That's my girl, he whispered. I've waited so long to hear you. Ava giggled again. Lila made a soft noise of protest, wanting attention. Grace blinked up at him with slow, curious eyes. The room felt full of sound, full of light, full of life. Later, when Keisha stepped out to wash her hands, Thomas lingered in the therapy room, watching the girls resting in their swings. He whispered to them, I didn't know I could feel this again. His daughters were quiet, but their presence spoke volumes. Your mother would be so proud, he whispered, touching the edge of Grace's swing. So proud of you. And so ashamed of me. A tear fell onto his hand. He didn't wipe it. He didn't hide from himself anymore. I'm going to fight for you, he whispered. I promise. Keisha returned quietly. She didn't speak at first, just watched him, something fragile softening in her expression. You're doing it, she murmured. You're coming back. He looked up at her. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Yes, she said softly, but now you're willing to learn. Today had changed him, completely, irreversibly. It wasn't the movements. It wasn't the laughter. It was the truth. His daughters were alive in ways he had never allowed himself to see. Tomorrow would bring the next shift, a shift so profound that it would break him open entirely. Because love was returning to this house, and with love came the one moment he never expected to witness. The moment his daughters would stand. The morning of the miracle began quietly, too quietly. Georgetown's historic townhouses were still wrapped in morning fog, and the sun hadn't yet fought its way over the Potomac. The Prescott mansion sat in a soft, pale haze that made everything feel suspended, like time itself was holding its breath. Thomas woke with his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. Something felt different. Something in his bones. In the air. In the quiet hum of the house. He went through the motions, dress shirt, coffee, hallway walk, but the air felt charged, as if waiting for something impossible. At 8:17 his phone buzzed. A motion alert. Living room camera. He almost ignored it. Cameras buzzed all the time, nurses passing through, lights flickering, Keisha moving equipment. But then, a soft thud, a tiny squeal. A sound he had never heard before. A sound that carved through the walls he'd spent years building. His hands trembled as he tapped the alert. The feed opened. At first, he thought it was a glitch. 3 wheelchairs sat abandoned against the wall. Empty. Straps dangling, like shed shells. The camera adjusted. And then, Thomas's knees buckled. There they were. Ava, Leila, Grace. Standing. His daughters, the girls who were never supposed to stand, were on their feet, trembling, wobbling, legs shaking beneath them like newborn foals. And in front of them, kneeling with her arms open, face wet with tears and disbelief. Keisha, come on, sweet girls, she whispered, voice trembling. Come to me. 1 step. Just one. Ava swayed. Lila lifted her heel. Grace clung to the couch for balance, tiny fingers tight but determined. And then Ava stepped. 1 step. A shaky, miraculous step. Lila followed, her balance tipping sideways, but her tiny arms swinging until she steadied herself. Grace. Little Grace who doctors had said would never bear weight, never move intentionally, never control her lower body. Grace took a step, a half step, a trembling step, but a step. Keisha sobbed, collapsing to her knees. "You did it," she whispered, choking on emotion. "Oh my God, you did it." Ava toddled forward. Lila wobbled after her. Grace stumbled, caught herself, and pushed off again. They were walking. Thomas dropped the phone. It clattered onto the hardwood, screen still glowing, capturing a miracle unfolding in real time. He couldn't feel his legs, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He staggered backward until his shoulder hit the wall. Then he slid down it, hitting the floor as the sound in the house dissolved into static. His daughters. Walking. His body trembled. He pressed a shaking hand to his mouth, trying to quiet the sob tearing through his chest. This was impossible. Medically impossible. Scientifically impossible. And yet it was happening. His girls, his fragile, perfect, broken but not broken girls, were taking steps. He squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing into his palms. For the first time since the day Olivia died, he let himself break. Not quietly, not the controlled collapse of a man who won't show weakness, but fully, violently, painfully. He cried for Olivia, for the daughters he thought he'd lost to diagnosis, for the man he had become, for the hope he had smothered, for the miracle he was witnessing. When he finally forced himself to stand, his legs were shaking as badly as theirs. He stumbled down the hallway toward the living room. Keisha looked up just as he entered. "Thomas," she breathed. But the rest of her sentence disappeared because Ava had turned, all on her own, toward her father. Her tiny feet shuffled. Her arms reached out. Da. A sound. A shape. A beginning of a word. Thomas nearly collapsed again. Ava toddled forward until she stumbled into his legs, gripping the fabric of his pants with unsteady fingers. He fell to his knees, gathering her gently, terrified to break the strength she had found. "You." He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. "You walked to me." Ava giggled. A sound like sunlight through glass. Lila stumbled next, falling into his lap. Grace followed, using Ava for balance. Pressing her forehead to his chest, he held all three of them at once. His daughters, his miracles, his heartbreaks, his entire world, and he sobbed into their hair. "God, oh God, my girls, you did it. You really did it." Their bodies were warm, alive, moving. He felt Grace's foot kick against his thigh, Ava's fingers gripping his shirt, Lila leaning into his shoulder. He had never felt anything so holy. When he looked up, tears blurring his vision, Keisha was standing nearby, one hand over her mouth, the other clutching her necklace. He stood unsteady, holding the girls against his chest, and faced her. "How?" His voice cracked like old wood. "How did you do this?" Keisha shook her head, crying as hard as he was. "I didn't," she whispered. "They did." "No," he said, stepping closer, unable to mask the awe in his voice. "You changed everything. You gave them something I couldn't." Keisha wiped her face with trembling fingers. "I gave them belief," she whispered. "But they did the rest. They just needed someone to say they could." He took another shaking step toward her. "And me?" he asked. "What did I need?" She met his eyes. "To let them try," she whispered. "To let yourself try." He broke again, not with sobs this time, but with relief. A wave of it. Crushing. Overwhelming. Redemptive. He sank to the floor again, holding the girls as they clung to him. For the first time, he spoke the truth aloud, the truth he had locked behind years of grief and fear. "I gave up," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting them, but I was protecting myself. I was afraid to hope." Keisha knelt in front of him, tears streaming. "But hope is what brought your daughters to their feet," she said softly. "You didn't fail them, Thomas. You were hurting, but you're here now." He pressed his forehead to Ava's. "I'm here," he whispered. I'm here. I promise I won't look away again." The promise echoed through the room. Keisha stood. "Can I show you something?" she asked gently. Thomas wiped his eyes. "Yes." She reached out her hands to the girls. "Come on, angels," she whispered. "One more time. Just a few steps. Daddy's watching." He froze. "You want them to walk again?" he asked, terrified to hope twice in the same hour. "I want them to choose to walk," she said. That distinction split him open. Keisha stepped back and held out her arms. Ava looked up. Then she let go of Thomas's shirt. Lila followed. Grace steadied herself on his knee, then pushed off. They walked. Not gracefully, not cleanly, not far, but they did it. They chose to do it. Thomas covered his mouth and wept into his own palm. This wasn't an accident, wasn't a fluke, wasn't a single moment of luck. This was progress, real progress, life-changing progress. His daughters had stood and walked and lived. As Thomas watched his girls stumble forward, alive in ways he never imagined, a thought struck him like lightning. How many parents out there are still waiting for a moment like this? How many are praying for a sign, a change, a spark of hope, and don't know that one small step can rewrite a future? If this moment stirred even a little hope in you, even a flicker, then don't walk away from it. Stories like this aren't just told. They're held by those who believe in miracles that take their time. Stay with us, because hope doesn't end here. It begins again tomorrow. Keisha knelt as the girls collapsed into her arms, exhausted but exhilarated. Thomas approached her slowly, reverently, still trembling from everything his heart had endured. "You saved them," he whispered. She shook her head fiercely. "No, I only reminded them who they were." He stared at her a long moment, something deep and quiet passing between them. "Then remind me too," he whispered. Keisha didn't answer in words. She simply reached out, and together, for the first time, they held his daughters as a single, fragile, miraculous family in a house that finally felt alive again.